Magic the Gathering is very expensive, and this can be a tremendous barrier for new and old players alike. Today, I want to unveil some decks that defy the controversial notion that a good deck requires a hefty price tag. Through the internet, I have discovered many affordable decks, and I wish to share with you some of my favorite designs, starting at a measly $1 deck all the way to $50. This $1 deck is comprised of 3 spells and 97 lands. The Commander, Countryside Cruiser, Fatal Frenzy, and Fury Charm. Countryside Cruiser reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it into your graveyard. Repeat this process. Whenever a land card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 on Countryside Cruiser. Fatal Frenzy. Until end of turn, target creature you control gains trample and gets +X+0, where X is its power. And Fury Charm reads, choose one, destroy target artifact, or target creature gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. With Fury Charm, we are only going to probably be using the +1/+1 and trample. The way you want to play this deck is unapologetically aggressive, forsaking defense entirely. On turn 3, you aim to deploy your commander, waiting patiently for turn 4 to start milling lands into your graveyard, and buff Countryside Cruiser to his max. However, be warned, you only have 2 rounds to destroy your opponent. Otherwise, you risk self-milling and losing the game entirely. Reserve Fury Charm for when people try to block you, otherwise you do not really need it. But I would use Fatal Frenzy liberally, irrespective of the circumstances. This deck, while potent, exhibits many vulnerabilities such as Death Touch, counter spells, removal spells, mill, or any deck with multiple creatures. So you have 2 options to avoid these decks at all costs, or to face your incredibly fast losses with your head held high. How I would make this deck better is considering introducing some board wipes such as Chain Reaction and Blasphemous Act to obliterate massive amounts of creatures, like the thousands of goblins that will be emerging on turn 4. I would also include something like Rogue's Passage to make your commander unblockable, although this would put us over budget by 300%. Who wants to spend $3 on Magic these days? Don't worry, this deck has a lot more spells, more specifically enchantments. Our chosen commander will be Tavasa the Sunlit. They read, Tavasa the Sunlit gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. Whenever you cast your first enchantment spell each turn, draw a card. To optimize our commander, 38% of our deck will be comprised of enchantments, with 84% of those enchantments being 3 mana or less. The goal is to buff our creatures, more specifically our commander, to deal significant amounts of damage to our opponents. Key cards include All That Glitters, Finest Hour, Righteous Authority, and Sage's Reverie. To protect against threats, Banishing Light and Conclave Tribunal offer exile-based removal, while Kurder's Ward provides hexproof. Deep Freeze, Frogify, and Kazmina's Transmutation neutralize creature abilities, and Ground Seal prevents graveyard and library interactions, saving you death by cascade. Now I know, this deck already has a lot of low mana enchantments, but to ensure we can play one after the other, these mana ramping cards will be crucial. Dawn's Reflection, Fertile Ground, and Gift of Paradise not only accelerates our mana production, but has a lot of flexibility in colors. Now our creatures are a lot more expensive, usually spanning 3 to 5 mana. Ajani's Chosen allows us to create 2/2 white cat creature tokens whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield. Meanwhile, Aeromancer allows us to retrieve enchantments back from our graveyard. Harvest Guard All Seeds prevents damage whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield. And Heliod's Pilgrim allows us to fetch auras from our library. The instants and sorceries are just removal and extra mana ramp. There are cards in this deck that I have not gone over, but they are still very important. So please go and look at the link down below if you're interested. This deck is pretty sound and you can do a lot with what you are given. But if you're looking to bring this deck to the next level, I recommend a few really powerful cards like Cirrus Sanctum, which boosts white mana based off of how many enchantments you have, and recovery options like Resurgent Belief and Replenish. Another card that would be a great addition is Leyline of Anticipation. Maybe you think that deck is worthless, or you just hate enchantments. Maybe you just want to blow through your opponents with one creature without being on a time crunch. Well, I have just the deck for you. Our commander Progentis. It has protection from everything. And if he is put in the graveyard from anywhere, you just shuffle him back in your library or put him into your command zone, whichever you prefer. The kinds of cards that usually will get us to our end goal consist of Kami of False Hope, sacrifice Kami of False Hope, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Secure a Tribe Elder, sacrifice Secure a Tribe Elder. Search your library for a basic land card, put that on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Spore Frog, sacrifice Spore Frog, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. And Spring Bloom Druid. When Spring Bloom Druid enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a land. If you do, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. We are specifically trying to prevent as much damage as possible and mana ramp to the extreme. There are almost no other cards in this deck that will not get you to this goal. There are a few other cards that do help us gain advantage for drawing, such as Dictate of Krufix. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Fact or Fiction. Reveal the top cards of your library, and opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put one of those piles in your hand and the other into your graveyard, and pull from tomorrow. Draw X cards and discard a card. Then we just have a couple of cards that make our attacks with our commander a little more potent. Finest Hour. It has Exalted, and whenever a creature you control attacks alone, if it's the first combat phase of the turn, untap that creature. After the phase, there's an additional combat phase. And Rhythm of the Wild. Creatures you control cannot be countered, and non-token creatures you control have Riot. And just so we can recycle a bunch of cards that we put into our graveyard, we have Wildest Dreams. Return target X cards from your graveyard to your hand, and Nostalgic Dreams. As an additional cost to cast Nostalgic Dreams, discard X cards from your hand, return X cards from your graveyard to your hand. If you're curious about why I don't get into any other card in this deck, it's because they are all the same cards. We have Riot Control, Holy Day, Haze of Pollen, etc, etc, etc. You may be looking at the link down below and saying, hey Spider, this deck costs almost $100. I thought the budget was $50. And all I have to say is, you're clearly not being a penny pincher. You can get the same deck for $50. At the used card sale. I'll have links to everything I've talked about in the comments down below, and I will link websites to find cards that are on a specific budget. If you enjoyed this video, check out this next one. I bet you'll find some useful tools, or something a little weird.